Aanchal, right. Very important, uh, I think, to talk about first. The inception of Thought Project and how are intimate spaces fashioned in virtual spaces. Uh, and I think I'll ask you first and then you can proceed. And how can one facilitate communication through drama, you think?
All right. Thank you, Suchetna. I was in fact just talking to Abhishek, and I said, as I'm hearing these speakers, I said I'm going to slightly revise the prompts a little and quickly add in some things that I think will help tie up
Sure, sure. Yeah.
a lot of what we've spoken. But just firstly, like I'm so excited to just be sitting here and listening to all the speakers. I think most of their work I've been following for a while, so to actually hear them today has been a great experience for me. So now I don't even care about my talk. I think my work is done here. So thank you, everyone. And I feel like everyone's explored so many aspects of performance, and I think I'm going to pick up from where Chetna also left off, where she spoke of this exhaustion happening in online spaces, where we just now I think have had enough. But I'm still going to talk about what happens when you bring a group of absolute strangers in an online space to perform. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And just to give everyone context, I run an organization called Thought Project. And Thought Project uses applied theater tools to work with schools, universities, community groups to build an embodied understanding of issues of gender, sexuality, and mental health. And I'm going to tell you more about that. But let me start with a story. So back in March 2020, we had a gender sensitization workshop to facilitate. And at the time of prepping, we weren't in a pandemic. So all the tools I was looking at were very reflective of that, very physical and participatory. And I needed a few monologues for that. So I had shortlisted a play I wanted to read and I started reading, but I couldn't. There were 47 characters and I kept losing track and the narrative blurred and I was just staring at the paper by the end of it. And I realized that I've actually always struggled with reading plays, even though I work in theater. Reading plays has been very challenging. It either takes too long or you just, scan it to find that monologue and you're done with it. So finally, I had a few very kind friends who pitched in and said, "Acha, chalo, we'll read it with you. We'll take you through it." And it was actually great. We had so much fun. I managed to find the monologues. Of course, they're unused because the workshop never happened as we went into lockdown. But that experience is something I really took away from that meeting with my friends I had. And I actually started thinking that I'm genuinely not the only one. If I'm struggling, I'm sure there are a lot of other people. And I started thinking, do people even read plays? Who reads a play, right? And in a pandemic where theaters have been shut down now, how are we consuming plays? What are we doing with this wide pool of plays that we have available? And that's where things started. And like for a very long time, there's been this uncomfortable compromise between people who see a play as a literary text and those who regard it as a theater script to be performed. And then the word performance itself has become so multivalent, and there's so many newer meanings that keep coming up for it, which actually draw attention to the ideas of dialogue, voice, heteroglossia, and all those terms that come together to then constitute performance. So, what are the two forms inseparable then? Theater, a play as a literary text and as a performance tool, are these inseparable, or is there a way to bring them together? And it's quite clear that drama or a play to the reader is very textual, whereas to the spectator it's audio visual. But I wanted to do something that we could bring this textual and audio visual together, and that's literally on the bedrock of these many questions that Curtain Call, an initiative that we run at Thought Project, was conceptualized. And just a disclaimer. So Curtain Call is also part of a larger research project. As we dive into a few of the observations we've had, you'll see that. So I'll be constantly asking questions and unpacking a lot of these ideas along with you today. So do bear with me because I feel I ask a lot of questions and it's a good way to make more meanings. So the concept of Curtain Call is really simple. Our team at Thought Project, we decide on a play every month. It's a thematic play, usually in tandem with what's going on around in the world. And anybody above the age of 18, literally anybody, can sign up to either be a reader or a viewer. Now, readers get the script a day or so before we meet online on Zoom, and they get assigned a character right before the reading. So, what readers do is they read the lines of the characters as and when they come up in the play. And that's it. And then post the reading, because we're always bursting with thoughts and ideas and lots of questions. Kya, "Arey, ye kyun bola? Ye idhar kyun dala?" We sit and we discuss everything that we've thought of, or any parallels we've drawn, and a whole lot of things come up in the discussion. Now, my primary rationale was just to read plays, okay, because I wanted to get through a lot of plays. So I said this will be great. But because post reading, a lot of these conversations started coming up, and it actually got me thinking on a whole lot of aspects, of which two I want to discuss with you today. Um, the observations, right, like I said, is it's extremely complex, and the primary thought that I found myself, or the primary question I found myself asking, is who is a performer? Okay, and how do I answer that? And I felt like the starting point to answer this question was to look at who do we not cover in our definitions of who a performer is. Who are we leaving out? Now, this is very interesting because the composition of the reading groups that we've had at Curtain Call, and it's a new group every time. So about 95% of our participants at Curtain Call have been women, and women across locations, across India, across the world, across age groups, across social locations as well. And it was really interesting to see women meet every month to discuss these extremely thematic plays, read them, discuss them, draw parallels. Because historically, public language has always been deeply gendered. We have very different expectations about the way men and women should do or conduct themselves linguistically. Men are expected to be direct, verbose, and spoken, whereas women indirect, shy, and unspoken. And this refusal to access of public language is one of the major forms of oppression. And makes you realize that individual speech is never free. And that becomes very interesting because it is this very speech that we use to articulate our oppressions in the first place. And when language itself is oppressive, what does one do? And in theater particularly, right, and in a play script, language becomes your primary tool. And our very masculine structure of language poses a very big problem to deform these linguistic patterns, because women are invisibilized in terms of the vocabulary we're using, in terms of the narratives that are being written out. Something as basic as universalizing male pronouns, right? Our default go-to pronouns are always male. And this universalization is leaving women out, is constantly invisibilizing them. And because of this, what ends up happening is that women's voices are always heard in mimicry, right? So you'll have male playwrights. Historically, it's always been male playwrights writing female characters. So even when women are performing, and that came much later in theater history, when women did start performing also on stage, they were performing characters written by men through a male understanding, from a male gaze, putting out a very male understanding of what women are and should be. And that has happened so long, for so many years, that it has constantly sought to just erase women's experiences and lived realities. And then we have, I mean, not to say that Curtain Call is completely changing that, but to be aware of that history, and then to see women coming in a group in an online platform from their homes, which is such a personal space, right? From their home, coming here to discuss these plays, to talk about that invisibilization, to look at a point in the play and see that, okay, but I don't relate to what the playwright has just said, or I don't agree with the thoughts put out over there. And to see them building that critique was so interesting. I felt it was such a subversive act, to just see that playing out. But what does that mean in a pandemic then? And how are these spaces to talk and express suddenly accessible to women? And why were even women accessing it? And why do we need them to access these spaces? So the answer, I mean, the pandemic is an unusual time, and I think all the speakers here have documented as to how they've made meanings of the pandemic, wherein, this thinking, you can write plays while sitting in isolation, to coming up with newer forms of engaging and using tools. So it's an unusual time. We'll be talking about it for a long time, and it's certainly going to be a part of history. But how are we going to document this history? What knowledges are going to be produced out of our lived realities, and who is going to get to document that? I think at Curtain Call, I found myself constantly asking that question and observing in very real time that the performance that we were engaging with was so closely related to our lived experiences that anytime performers found themselves relating to a character, they were making those meanings in their head. And we were collectively as a group able to produce these embodied knowledges, because we were not just reading, we were then discussing it, deconstructing what the playwright is saying, agreeing, disagreeing, bringing in our own lived realities. And I felt like, these embodied knowledges will never be granted the kind of validity we do for scientific knowledges. And I feel like it's important for us to then think of performances as not just a work of imagination, but also as an object of study, and use it as a tool of inquiry. And which is what we're doing with Curtain Call, is when we look at women performing and they're talking about their experiences, they're able to produce these knowledges of how things have changed for them in the pandemic and how that's reflective in their participation here. And just also, I feel deep catharsis have come through. The number of women who've come up and said, oh, I used to do theater back in college, but just now with family and children, it's become impossible to do. Or somebody else saying, oh, I did theater, but like later it became very inaccessible. I couldn't give that much time to rehearsals anymore, but this was great for us to get back to. And these are actual testimonies that we have received. And to be able to then see them making meanings of images, words, and strengthening the ability to observe their personal roles, their own roles, and then mediating that flexibility between the different roles. That of somebody being a mother, somebody being a performer here, their own experiences with different institutions. Like, I'm just going to quickly give you an example. Last month, we read a translation of a Telugu play called Six of Them by Volga. And the play does critique various societal structures that are very oppressive for women. And post-play, women constantly drew parallels. They spoke about, yes, this has exactly happened with me, or I get how marriage as an institution can be oppressive. And somebody actually spoke of her own aversion to the institution while she was about to get married for the past few months. And to be able to put that out there, that experience and the knowledge that it then ends up creating for a group, I feel is an extremely subversive act where we're redefining what it means to learn, what it means to produce knowledge as well. And I also see my 8-minute mark has come up. Oh, I did not realize it has. So I'm very quickly going to wrap up that I've used this term performance very fleetingly, right? Without unpacking it at all. And what does it mean to perform? Because when we started Curtain Call, I actually had I kept using the word performance, right? When I looked back in my debrief poster reading, I would keep looking at it as performance. And it is something that readers have also shared with us through the research paper saying, yes, we felt like we were performing. I found myself modulating and adding facial expressions. But a lot of other people I've spoken to who may not have been a part or have been from the theater industry have said that, reading is not performance. You guys are just reading. It's not a performance. And this was really interesting for me to pause and reflect that what does it mean to then perform? Is the act of simply reading not a performance? Because even when I'm reading out loud, I am focusing on articulation. I will be louder. Me being present here, giving you this talk, talking to you about Curtain Call is a performance itself, right? Because I have my points noted down. I do have a certain script. I am expressing and using my hands a certain way. So that still is performance. And by constantly breaking down these barriers to performance, can we make it more accessible? And I feel like the panel started really well, where we looked at Jannati Manish's work and looking at making performances political and then making them accessible. And I just feel like through the talk, we kept looking at how we could do that increasingly. And I'm going to leave that a little incomplete because, like I said, I have a lot of questions and very few answers. So I'm going to leave it at that. And hopefully through the questions, we'll be able to unpack a little more. Yeah, thank you.